Hi, this is Dr. Lewis Hassel coming to you from the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. And I'd like to present a topic today in my lab management and practice management series relative to crisis management or disaster preparation. So if I can just introduce that as a possibility, one of the things that we all hope that happens is that we survive a crisis in our practice or our laboratory. And in that regard, as I used to say, preparation precludes proper performance. So preparation can dispel panic as well. So what are we thinking about here? Well, there are a lot of things that might cause you to have a nightmare. Maybe you have a disgruntled partner or associate who you fear may become violent or seek retribution in some other inappropriate way. You may have a partner or another person in your program who is fiscally irresponsible, who uses their practice credit card inappropriately, or who, even worse, may embezzle money. Or there may be other sort of procedural violations that expose you to various risks. One thing that used to bother me, and maybe less so now, but is what if so-and-so, my boss, my key partner, died? In our practice, in our situation, the departure of a key employee on a key team can make life very difficult and challenging for the rest of the team. And then sometimes there are just kind of glacial economic forces that may come together to steamroller your practice. The hospitals go out of business, or the economic climate changes, things are consolidated and you get downsized. There can be a variety of other sorts of things that include acts of nature that destroy your infrastructure, or other internal conflicts and those sorts of things that all can be caused to lose sleep at night and so forth. So although we may not think about it, anticipating the kinds of things that could go wrong can help us to prepare for them to the degree, at least, that we have some control. Now, traditionally, risk management, sort of the inside the box viewpoint, has been to manage the conventional risks, malpractice, medical errors. Well, you can insure against that. Maybe you can have officers and directors insurance. You can have other general liability insurances, life, property, and so forth. Those can all be mitigated by the use of an insurance product at a certain fee. But there are a variety of risks that are non-traditional, but still somewhat foreseeable and potentially reducible if we take proper preventive measures or preparatory measures. And these can include things in the cultural and interpersonal realms, maybe to some degree in the geopolitical, but certainly in the legal and contractual area. We spend a lot of time worrying about that. And then we might sort of wonder about, well, what about the natural disasters? How do we recover following a disaster? This situation where the floods of a major city were, or where the streets of a major city were dramatically flooded for days on end, illustrated one of the challenges that recovery after such an event takes a long time. And if you're poorly prepared, you may never recover. Well, when we think about certain things, sometimes there are decisions that are responsible for our bad luck. And if we think long and hard about it, we probably can go back to that point at which we recognize a bad decision being made. When some of our colleagues at Harvard Business looked at this, they found a number of factors that were particularly prone to lead to bad decisions. Faulty or misleading prior experience, prejudgments that are wrong, inappropriate or hidden self-interests, and sometimes inappropriate attachments. Well, that may be a form of self-interest. And this is why we look towards transparency in so many things, to avoid this when we're conveying scientific information and so forth, to avoid bias in some of our assumptions or our testing methods and so forth. But these also apply in the management and the leadership side of things as we look at an organization, whether that's a practice, whether that's a self-freestanding laboratory, or even within a large hospital system. So let me just illustrate this with one nice little case study. This was a medium-sized practice, and some of the workers traveled together on assignments or to meetings, and that's fine. But over time, it appeared that one pair of workers seemed to be engaging in infidelity with each other, and unfortunately, they also were involved in an employer-supervisor-employee relationship at work. So then nothing's done about this. And over time, conditions begin to change. And lo and behold, the division in which that particular employee is working is now being downsized. So the employer supervisor fails to recuse themselves from the deliberations and stands firm in the need to keep that employee in their position. Well, is this preventable? Yes. Is this a cultural crisis? Well, for those who don't know about it, it may be. Are the outcomes all favorable? No. This could lead to very adverse outcomes in both the legal as well as the moral realm and other areas as well. So just a few thoughts for consideration. So as we think about heading into a crisis situation, there are a number of things that can be very, very helpful to us in facing a crisis. One is just the basic cultural norms of the organization. What are the ways that we behave towards one another? When we're under stress in a crisis, those norms may be slightly discarded, but if they're very firmly entrenched, they can be a great savior in those circumstances. When we faced a recent COVID crisis coupled with a physical disaster and other sorts of things, the fact that we had healthy employee-supervisor relationships, the fact that we had good relationships with other divisions in the organization, the fact that we had robust systems and had experience responding to crises in the past made it much easier. A healthy decision-making process can also be very helpful, one that's neither too centralized nor too distributed, one where responsibility can be comfortably delegated to other people. The structure of the organization may help to define that as well as to make it more resilient. Sometimes our attitudes towards risk or towards other legal issues is also very important. If we have a whatever gets it done kind of attitude and the devil may care kind of approach to laws and rules, well, that may not serve us well in a crisis. And finally, if we have prepared, if we have thought through, if we have a disaster plan, and particularly if we have practiced or drilled on those issues, we may be much better off than if we have not. These are all things that we have some control over prior to a disaster. Once the disaster hits, it's very hard to change cultural behaviors. It's very hard to change your decision-making process. It's very hard to change attitudes or aptitudes, and it's certainly impossible to practice. Well, there are a couple of things where an organization needs to be thinking. What is their mission and what are their values? And in that process, they need to be thinking about the leadership that's going to assume control, both the ones who are currently in control as well as the ones whom they want to develop for the future. Because organizations need to continue to grow and develop. And if the only way to progress is out the door, we will cut ourselves off from capable leadership in the future. So here's an example. I'm aware of a practice. It was a large practice. It had a single pioneer that had founded the practice over 20 years ago and had built the practice up into something really substantial and marvelous. But of late, the founder was less and less adept in the day-to-day operations of the work of that practice, whether that was mythology or some other field. And some of the younger colleagues began to challenge him on various issues. Finally, after an emotional, near deadly headbutting with one of the other partners, he just said, I can't take it anymore. And he just said, I'm going to retire and do something I can enjoy. The practice had never had any other leader, nor even discussed how such a transition might occur. What were they to do? It was too late to prepare for this crisis when this evolved. So having the conversation in advance, thinking through, thinking ahead 4, 5, 10 years down the road, and making appropriate adjustments now to that time when so-and-so may want to hang up their shoes or do something else is very, very important. Well, there are a number of traits that healthy cultures have, and the Institute for Business and Technology listed these in their website, but you'll find them in a variety of forms and formats from various sources. But one of those healthy traits is a great degree of transparency or openness and a sense of humility. In other words, it's not about my ego. It's not about your position, your power and authority. There's a transparency and a humility and a respect, a dignity that's expressed for one another from top to bottom, irregardless of position. There's accountability and responsibility for the work, for what the decisions that are made, for the things that are planned, the preparations that are made, and so forth. There is empowerment. In other words, we allow people to make decisions, to take on risk within the limits that seem appropriate culturally and organizationally. There's also almost always a very fierce commitment to do things the right way, to do the right things and to do them the right way. There's also in that process an attitude of learning from their mistakes. Rather than blaming individuals or shaming them for messing up, this is an opportunity to become better. What can we learn from this experience? Finally, well, not finally, but there's also total integrity and consistency in the decisions that are made. Self-interest versus overall organizational and communal interests have their appropriate balance based on this ability to be honest with ourselves and with others, and the openness and humility that we talked about to begin with. Finally, healthy cultures have this sense of collaboration, of a sort of synergy, a desire to work in teams and to collaborate with each other to get the best product, even when that requires a great degree of courage when facing opposition or a crisis. Sometimes this sort of healthy culture is fractured because one or more of these is missing when we hit a crisis. On the other hand, sometimes these cultures can be enormously strengthened when that crisis enables us to hone and practice and put in place the awareness of these traits more powerfully. So here's another case study to consider. So let's say that you're looking at a new instrument for your laboratory, and a variety of the decision makers are involved, and you each express your opinions. Because this is a flat organization, eventually a purchase decision is made based on a very slim majority of votes in favor of one instrument over another. Well, unfortunately, the instrument that's purchased does not fit the one who has to use it the most. So ironically, even though that individual is the one who's going to use it every day, it's inappropriately sized, inappropriately oriented for their particular needs and circumstances, while the other people who voted for that instrument because it was less expensive or whatever have no contact, have no daily use of the item. Well, then to make matters worse, a few months later, after using the device, you discover that it has a major safety or operational defect, and hence it's going to be sent back to the manufacturer. And as a result, you have to go back and review all the work done on the instrument to correct the potential errors, to recall the results, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you can see how this is really a decision-making error and a decision-making crisis. When you have to come to a decision on the basis of a very slim majority, that is a recipe for potential disaster. And as in this case, there was an economic liability as well. Well, one of the things that's important to discuss or to uncover with this is that you need to make the commitment to all the stakeholders to not move forward on vital decisions that affect them until we have consensus. And for me, that means no thumbs down. The quotation, split decisions, split working relationships, split groups that need to work together, and waste resources is very apt. So try to avoid split decisions where one half or one slim majority favors one choice and a minority favors a different choice. That's almost certainly a recipe for disaster. So I mentioned the thumbs up situation. That is what we've embodied here in this situation. It's a very simple sign. If thumbs up, I can support this. If my thumb's down, I don't support it. If my thumb's kind of in the middle, it's not down, it's not quite all the way up, well, that means I'm probably okay, but I can't fully support it, but I'm not against it. And the things that allow that to happen is if we're looking for win-win solutions. We're looking for things that benefit all the stakeholders. And we've taken the time required to uncover all the issues and concerns in an open, transparent process. And as we do so, to address them. So strive to get that thumbs up approach with all of your decisions, at least the critical ones where many stakeholders are involved. Now, why does this kind of decision-making work? Well, it's because as a group, we're smarter than any one individual is. Almost universally, every situation, problem-solving exercise that's been devised will illustrate this truth, that a group decision that's undertaken in an open, transparent environment, collectively sharing, will almost uniformly make better decisions than individuals. And action plans then that depend on individual and group action are more likely to be enacted effectively when that decision-making is shared, when everyone has a stake and has supported that decision. Now, making a decision based on the power holder, the most experienced, or an autocratic form may be efficient, but it may not always be correct because there may be critical issues, critical facts, critical considerations that are not taken into account. And finally, at times decisions are made and seemingly supported, but someone's holding back and may not be fully committed. And if that's the case, they may exert some form of passive resistance or covert resistance to that decision. And that's a dangerous circumstance for any organization. Well, as you think about transitions in leadership, particularly that example I illustrated before, I think you need to think about internal strengths and weaknesses. Where are we strong? Where are we missing things? And that can be both on a ability or accreditation standpoint, as well as on a personal and emotional standpoint. We have to be thinking about what lies ahead. What are the external risks or threats? Where is the front of potential attack? And what kind of leader will be most effective to help us in that circumstances? In the case I cited earlier, that crisis led to employing some consultants and facilitators to help the group identify a successful path from their crisis to a stable future. In doing so, they looked at a number of successful models, both in the medical field as well as in unrelated fields, to see what worked well for others. And then you have to move quickly to replace that lost talent, getting the very best that you can, of course, and avoiding a rush to hire just anybody, because certainly a mishire is worse than no hire. Why is that so? Well, when you think about the number of dollars that are spent in recruitment, on training, and so forth, as well as what you might have to do in terms of damage control if that is a mistake or a mistake is made, that is a not trivial amount of money, not a trivial amount of time and effort, and thus hiring correctly the first time, do it right the first time is the best approach. Now, HR departments or recruiters sometimes may be able to help, but by and large, it's really the stakeholders who have to be the ones who are making the recruitment and who are finding that HR players. That's their job to select out the right person for the job, not the human relations department. Another challenge in this whole process is that on and off ramp. Sometimes people want to linger longer, be the guru on the side, maybe not fully supporting, but siphoning off resources that others might not use. You have to think about the expectations that are involved. What if this fails? What is the implications for future leadership if this process is used and the parameters established for the next transition? And most importantly, how are we preparing and selecting future leaders for their job? What kind of skills, what kind of exposure do they have to have? Now, one of the things that I have been feeling very strongly about for some time is that validation is important. And that applies to procedures, to instruments, and individuals. So we oftentimes will validate the technical elements, the instruments, reagents, and so forth, whether that be billing software to biopsy forceps or whatever. And we may look at pre and post analytic elements of the system, the courier bags, the fax machines, the computer terminals, and so forth. And those should also be tested and verified. And, you know, we had a recent talk about validating a pneumatic tube system. Why? Because you need to know where the failure points might be and to make sure it's going to work in an appropriate way as well. But individual performance also should be validated and defined, what those performance limits are before you put people in the role where they could mess up and cost you a great deal of pain and angst. That can apply to new hires as well as to existing personnel that are put to new duties. So here's another disaster case just to consider. A pathologist that I know was employed in a New Orleans hospital during the time of Hurricane Katrina, which a decade or so ago. And during the time of that crisis, he lived in his office. He ate crackers and did any and all tasks that were required amid really challenging circumstances, flooding, power challenges, et cetera, until they could get all of the patients and workers out of that damaged institution. But then what happens? The hospital never opens again. His home is flooded, his car is inoperable, and his family, fortunately, is relocated to another state where his wife has employment. Well, unfortunately, all of the medical records of the hospital are largely destroyed or unavailable. The medical staff office no longer exists, and no one can answer queries about his credentials or capabilities. His former colleagues and peers, partners are all scattered to who knows where. He can barely find their phone numbers in his cell phone. So creating a path forward out of that kind of a crisis is a big issue. So I recommend that in your 72-hour kit of what you grab and go when you've got to be at some, when you can't stay where you are, that you might want to include your up-to-date curriculum vitae, your licenses, privilege lists, and so forth, and contact information about partners and so forth that you may be able to contact in that circumstance. Well, a couple of missteps to avoid. Don't ever choose win-lose over win-win. That is a definite recipe for failure. Respect individuals. Don't fail in that. Step up as a personal leader. Be flexible rather than rigid. Work as a team, not as an individual. Develop others. Don't suppress them. And don't hide critical information. That's all I can say about that. Our culture, your culture and your organization is dependent on your history. What happened? That's going to define culture. How you tell the story, how the young people growing up know the legends, well, habits and rituals can tell that story, celebrating successes and so forth. And what you do when things go awry really does matter. Your choices reveal and create your new culture. What you recognize, reward, and honor helps to reinforce culture if, and only if, that's aligned with your mission and values. Well, thank you for joining me for this short review of a couple of principles of practice leadership and management. If you like this, please hit that subscribe button and share it with your friends. And let us know if you have any comments. So until next time, thanks so much for joining me.